Head coach Matt Eberflus announced that Caleb Williams and most of the Chicago Bears starters will not be playing in the preseason finale against the Kansas City Chiefs. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to give my players that I feel like are truly fighting for their roster spot, the final spot in the 53-man roster in the final preseason game. We're going to get into all that plus more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bears Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bears news and content.
What's going on, Bears fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bears Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bears related. I'm the host, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Chi Bears Central on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. And so, one thing that we did not talk about because it was not released by the time I dropped the daily episode yesterday is the fact that Matt Eberflus did announce that the majority of the starters will not play against the Kansas City Chiefs, which does include Caleb Williams. And so Caleb Williams played the entire first half in the last game, so that's cool there when you look at it. Matt Eberflus made it clear on how many possessions that he wanted Caleb Williams to play, on how many snaps he wanted Caleb Williams to play. Between 42 and 55 is what he outlined at the beginning of the preseason. Comes down to 42 reps in the preseason, so a little bit under that projection. But overall, this leaves the question on, all right, which starters will play? And are these starters that are still fighting for their position, their starting position, something like that? Maybe some starters that have been ramping up, maybe didn't play as much over the first three preseason games where they're going to get some snaps in this one to kind of make sure they're up to task, things like that. But overall, still very excited about tomorrow's game against the Kansas City Chiefs. But this all brings back to Caleb's preseason. Now, because we know that Caleb Williams is not going to be playing in the final preseason game, even though I kind of expected that to happen, now we have a full view of what Caleb Williams' preseason was for the Chicago Bears. He ended up going 10 of 20 on passes at 50%, 170 yards, no passing touchdowns, no turnovers, and a passer rating of 79.2. He led Chicago to 3 scoring drives and ran in one as well in those possessions. 7 possessions he ended up playing. So, that's what it comes down to it, man. Eberflus also saying, overall, I thought it was a good preseason for Caleb Williams. And, it was one that we got to see a lot of what Caleb Williams, the ability that Caleb Williams has, right? We saw a lot of what he's able to do. And when it comes down to it, now it's just about the regular season. That's the most important thing here for the Chicago Bears is how well Caleb Williams plays in the regular season. And very much so the Bears could have seen enough, right? I've talked a lot about the fact that I think that the Bears have very much kind of left their offense kind of in shadows a lot so that people don't know what to expect from this team coming into it. And that's perfectly fine. Like, this is a Bears team with expectations. And this is a Bears team that is trying to get shit done. And just to be frank. So, Caleb Williams has had a solid preseason is what we'll call it. Has it been perfect? No, it hasn't been perfect. He's made some mistakes. It's going to happen through a rookie. I've been telling you guys for a long time, for anybody who's like, oh, well, Caleb Williams needs to come in and be generational right away. Told you guys that probably wasn't going to happen, but even then, the preseason isn't the thing to judge that off of. Like, the preseason was always about getting reps in. It wasn't necessarily, again, the process, not necessarily the result. And we got to see a lot of how Caleb Williams manipulates the pocket, how he's going to move up and down the field, the ability to make plays with his legs, but the fact that he's looking to make those plays with his arms. His processing of defenses seems really good, again, at the preseason level. And the question is, no matter what Caleb Williams did, and I'm just going to be frank here, no matter what he did in the preseason, everybody should be saying, all right, now go do it in the regular season. So the fact that he didn't throw for any passing touchdowns in the preseason, I don't really care about. Like, I know that not everybody's going to agree with that. Like, of course, I want to see it in the regular season. It was more about the process. It was more about what he did, the things that are going to be things that he can build upon. And I got to see a lot of that over the course of this preseason. So overall, heading towards the next game against the Kansas City Chiefs, it really just comes down to what starters are playing, what position battles are left up to be decided in that, and then after that, the roster cuts, which brings us to our next topic for today's episode is players that could be off the Bears 53-man roster. These are players that I have that are fighting for their spot on that 53-man roster to go into the season. And bigger names. Of course, we got like Theo Benedict, those type of guys. I don't know if they make it, but kind of the guys that we've seen, kind of guys that have had roles on the team in prior seasons, things like that. One of the biggest names that people are going to ask is Veis Jones. Now, I will say this. It seems like this coaching staff still believes in Veis, and because of that, it very well could come down to Ian Willer being the one that's cut, things like that. But Veis should at least still be on the radar of especially in this last preseason game, what does he bring, right? And does Ian Wheeler maybe get a little bit of a nod, who we've still seen the Chicago Bears running back coach even have an affinity for Ian Wheeler as well. But overall, it seems like this Bears team is still invested in what Veis Jones can potentially bring, even though, I have my doubts on what he can bring in reality. They're still locked in on that, and it seems like. So Veis is somebody to look out for on this list as well, but we'll see what comes down for it. But I'm going to start off in a kind of an unexpected position. I don't know if it's unexpected. It is a thinner position for the Chicago Bears, but Dominique Robinson has to be somebody that you have to keep a lookout on this, and to say that he may be cut. I won't say that it's a lock. I think that there are some guys on here that I do think are a lock to be cut, but Dominique Robinson has gotten passed up by Austin Booker and Hardy so far in this. Now, Jacob Martin is hurt, so it could be that Dominique Robinson ends up making this final 53-man roster because of that. But if Jacob Martin, from what we've heard in training camp, was fully healthy, on top of what we saw from Austin Booker and Daniel Hardy, I think it would be a foregone conclusion that Dominique Robinson is probably going to be cut. Now, another thing with that, as well as that, if the Bears do think they need to bring in a veteran edge in a Unique Ngakoue or anybody else, I think that that's a foregone conclusion. Then Dominique Robinson is on his way out with the Chicago Bears more than in. But we'll see what happens with the Jacob Martin. The Jacob Martin thing is what puts this kind of in flux for me. If Jacob Martin was fully healthy and we got to see him in preseason games perform like we've heard he's performed, at that point I would kind of have it that Dominique Robinson is probably on his way out of here. He hasn't really made the step, even though we heard that he transformed his body. He looked pretty good. We heard earlier in training camp that Dominique Robinson actually did some things and looked like he was gonna maybe surprise some people. Haven't really heard his name too much. And Daniel Hardy, to me, is a guy that I thought could have been cut and I thought was not going to make this final 53-man roster. But I think that the Bears may go younger with Daniel Hardy over Dominique Robinson just because of how good he's looked. And I do think if Hardy ends up going on the practice squad, he has a high probability to be poached from that practice squad quicker than what even a Dominique Robinson would do. So Dominique Robinson, the first name that I'm going to mention here, be on the lookout for that. The next one, Larryborm. Now, I've talked a lot about Larryborm and the potential of being cut. Now, I don't think it's as much of a conclusion as I once thought. Before the Chicago Bears re-signed DJ Moore, they had like $10-12 million in cap space. With the restructuring of DJ Moore's contract, it actually converted his whole salary this year to a signing bonus, which freed up $10 million more for the Chicago Bears. So now we're over $20 million in cap space right now. And so that $3 million that you would have saved by waiving Larryborm because his dead money is only $30,000, it may not be as beneficial to the Chicago Bears. But he still is on cut watch, mainly because of Jake Curran, I think, has passed him up in the depth chart. And while, again, like I've said, Larryborm isn't a terrible offensive lineman as a depth piece, with Kieran Amagaje being there, if the Bears feel like he may be ready to even contribute as a depth piece, again, that's not guaranteed. I want to be clear on here. But I do think with Jake Curran having experience playing under Shane Waldron's offense, that puts him above Larryborm. And overall, we just haven't seen Larryborm a lot. He's also one of the last players on this team that, as far as ones that haven't gotten an extension from the Ryan Pace era as well. So I do think that you can bet on maybe Larryborm being cut there. Again, we'll see what happens there. He's played both left tackle and right tackle over the course of his time here with the Chicago Bears. So that flexibility may keep him here. Especially because, again, that cap space that you're saving there, unless you're going out and getting a veteran and you just want to maintain that $20 million, it may not be as beneficial to the Bears. But I do think if Kieran Amagaje, if the Bears feel like confident at any point this season that Kieran's going to be able to get on the field for them, this whole season may be a redshirt year for Kieran Amagaje. But if they do feel comfortable that he can get in there, I do think that Larryborm is probably on his way out as well. And kind of in the similar vein as Larryborm is Tyreek Carter. Again, another guy, but he was drafted by Ryan Poles, so maybe that keeps him here if it comes down between him and Bourne. I think Carter hasn't necessarily shown as much as Bourne, in my opinion, but we'll see, right? He's played both guard spots, kind of like how Bourne has played both tackle spots. But with the fact that Ryan Bates, Matt Pryor, ready to chip in at guard, Nate Davis being healthy, let's hope that that's the case. It seems like those guys, Matt Pryor and Ryan Bates, have passed up as backups at guard ahead of Tyreek Carter. And because of that, you can't see Tyreek Carter being one of those guys that's probably cut and waived there and does not make that final 53-man roster for the Chicago Bears. So keep a lookout for that name as well. The next one up is Colin Johnson. Now, this may be surprising to hear Colin Johnson's name here, but even after that Hall of Fame game performance, we just haven't seen him. And it's come down to health. He's not been able to really build off that Hall of Fame game in any meaningful way. We haven't heard his name called. And so he's not even really practiced the last 2 weeks. And that's why he hasn't played. So, it could come down to, Colin Johnson showed us some things. Yeah, Colin Johnson looked good in that one game. But unfortunately, in the time period where it mattered the most, Colin Johnson has not been able to get out on the football field. And with the Bears, getting looks at other guys, right? And even maybe Sweeney being able to stay on this team, things like that. It's opened up the door to Colin Johnson, I think, being cut. And like I said, not only would that be a storyline for Hard Knocks, not that matters in what I'm doing here, but it is something to keep a lookout for, mainly because he hasn't had those opportunities. And so, with other guys on this roster like Freddie Swan, things like that, Dante Pettis as well, who they may look to keep, it may end up being that Colin Johnson just does not stick around for this team. So we'll take a look at what goes on there. But overall, like I said, I hope that Colin Johnson, whatever he's shown in practice, if he does practice any this week, that maybe it gives the Bears some confidence to keep him, because I think he does have an understanding of that system via what we've seen. But I wouldn't overlook the fact that Colin Johnson could be cut by the Chicago Bears as well. The next kind of two guys up that I'm going to bring up, and I know there are going to be people that said, hey, there's no way that they're going to cut this guy. But I think it will come down to maybe Micah Baskerville and Noah Sull. And I said this a little bit on a live stream a couple of days ago, and people reacted with, there's no way, Haize, there's no way. But it's not just when it comes down to that. Like, you got to look at it. Noah Sull has been hurt the majority of his time here in Chicago. Dating back to last season, most of the season, he's been hurt. When you have a guy like Micah Baskerville who can play inside and out, they've lined him up at either, it could add some flexibility. Now, I want to be clear here. In no way am I saying that Noah Sull should be. This is not a list of players that I'm saying I want to see cut. This is a list of players that I can see being cut because of the situation surrounding them. And with Micah Baskerville stepping up like he has the last couple of preseason games, and he's going to get a lot of snaps this game as well coming up, that it could force the Bears in a deep, unless they're cutting Carl Jones, other players, Amin Agbanjanbia, I believe is how you pronounce it. Those are guys that they may keep around on this roster. And Micah Baskerville, only 24 years old. He's only 1 year older than Noah Sull. So because of that, it could be another situation, a year and a half older than Noah Sull, where they look to keep the guy that's healthy. And that's not to say that maybe they don't pivot and look to keep Sull as well, maybe on the practice squad or something like that. I think he'd be snatched up pretty quickly if he does go to the practice squad. So that's not why I'm necessarily expecting that to be the case. But I do think that it could come down to two guys one guy in Noah Sull that still has a ton of promise. He still has a ton of promise on this team. But at the end of the day, the best ability is availability. And that's just what it comes down to, man. So, it could make a tough decision. We've seen tougher decisions made in a case like that. And so, those are the guys, as well as I did mention Ian Wheeler when I talked a little bit about Veis Jones. I think he's another guy to kind of keep a lookout for. Austin Reed, I think he's going to end up, of course, probably being on the practice squad. The running back situation is an interesting one to look at, more for the depth chart. I don't expect anybody to be cut as far as Roshan or Khalil Herbert to be traded or anything like that. But do any of the guys like Ian Wheeler, do they pass up a Travis Homer, things like that on this depth chart? So that's pretty much the list of guys that I'm kind of want to focus on here. I do think there's going to be some surprising cuts, and we're going to be here to break it down. As you guys know, we go live when news breaks, so we'll probably set up kind of a post day at the end of Saturdays. I think you probably see a lot of the cuts happen by Saturday, between Friday and Saturday, with us playing on Thursday, because that's going to be all the data that the Chicago Bears do need. So be on the lookout for that. But overall, man, there are some interesting things and pieces still left to be decided on this team when it comes down to it. When you also look at that tight end position as well, you got Cole Kmet, of course, Gerald Everett, Mercedes Lewis. Stephen Carlson is a guy who has played pretty well for the Chicago Bears at times, but do they keep him as a fourth tight end on this roster? Maybe, right? We could see what happens there. Freddie Swan is another one that I look at, and I really like the way that he's played so far, but it may come down between him and Colin Johnson as well. And Freddie Swan is a little bit of an older player, so At 26 years old, he's older than what Colin Johnson is, I believe. So that may, well, no, they're both 26 years old. So there you go on that one. But overall, I think it's going to be an interesting cut period for the Chicago Bears team. They're going to have to make some tough decisions on what they're going to need and want to do there. But overall, I think we're going to be okay. I really like what we've seen from this Bears team throughout a lot of pieces on it. And there are some guys on here that I would absolutely love to make the final roster, but they may end up being cut. Ian Willer's probably the one guy for me that I would love to see make the final roster. I think the world of a Ian Willer and what he can bring here, both in special teams, even though we haven't seen him a lot there, and just as a young 22-year-old running back that has tremendous upside. And I do think if he ends up getting put on the Chicago Bears practice squad, he's going to be snatched up pretty quickly there, at least in my personal opinion. So that's what I think it comes down to. We'll see what it all boils down and what it turns into for the team. But let me know down below, who are some guys that you think could be cut? Who will be some surprising cuts for you? Who's somebody that you think that the Bears should absolutely look to hold on to more than anything? Let me know all that down below. Now, before we go, I got one last thing that I want to talk about, and this is kind of piggybacking off something that me and Bobby talked about a little before, and that is Matt Eberflus. Matt Eberflus's growth here, and now we've gotten players that are also talked about when it comes to Matt Eberflus, what they see in him, right? Specifically, Tremaine Edmonds, who said this. For me, I trust the individual more. I respect the individual more. If you show up as your authentic self, I think we have a lot of guys who what you see is what you get. It's not like I'm going to show up for this person, I'm going to try to be this person, but behind closed doors, I'm this person. No, it's a genuine person. I think when you have a group of genuine people, I think that bond, that energy you feel, it's going to naturally feel different. And that was asked about when it came down to Tremaine Edmonds being asked about how Matt Eberflus has influenced this team. And I think one thing that we're seeing is that Matt Eberflus, to a degree, is kind of being underrated in a way, right? Now, make no mistake about it. For Chicago Bears fans, we are always going to respect one thing more than anything, and that's winning. And while Matt Eberflus, from his first season to his second season, over doubled the wins by the Chicago Bears, there's always been something there, like personally, and I'll own myself to task on this one, right? Is that I've always kind of looked at Matt Eberflus and just not really believed in him as a coach, right? But that has changed this offseason. That has changed through watching Hard Knocks. That has changed through just seeing how he's spent his time this time, over this offseason, really growing as a head coach. The confidence of Matt Eberflus is something that we're seeing here. And I think you have to also look at the nature and identity of this team. Now, we haven't built a culture as far as winning yet, right? We're trying to get to that. But there is an identity with this team. One thing that I've always given Matt Eberflus credit for is that it's not about where you were drafted necessarily. It's not about who your name is. It's about what you bring here. He's always given rookies and young players the opportunity to earn a role on this team. And that's not something you could say about every single team in this league or head coach in this league. And so Matt Eberflus is growing into his coaching identity. And with that growing into the coaching identity, you're starting to see the identity of the Chicago Bears grow with it, right? And that's something when you're trying to build a culture. That's something when you're trying to build something sustainable. That is something when you're trying to build something that is going to grow and develop over years. And Matt Eberflus is doing that. Finally, we're starting to see that from a Matt Eberflus. And that's what I like. I have to give credit where credit's due. I'm not somebody who's above being able to admit when I'm wrong. I'm not above being able to take new data and look at it in a different way. Matt Eberflus has personally shown me a lot. And I respect him in new heights and new ways so far, and just how he's grown as a head coach. I've talked about it before. It comes down to this. Matt Eberflus' development as a head coach, as long as he's still the head coach of the Chicago Bears, is just as important as the development of Caleb Williams, just as important as the development of Rome Odunze, just as important as the development of Javon Dexter, and having the right guys. And it seems like this Bears team has the right guys now. Shane Waldron on offense, Eric Washington on defense. We have the right guys here now at the coordinator positions that are helping support and strengthen and build that confidence in Matt Eberflus. Of course, the roster as well. We have the most talented roster that we've had since Matt Eberflus has come to this team, hands down. That's not even up for discussion, right? So as Matt Eberflus grows, and every basically episode of Hard Knocks, I gain a new respect for Matt Eberflus. But it still comes down to this. If you want the universal love of Bears fans, it comes down to winning. And it comes down to winning at a high level. And that's the next step for Matt Eberflus, much like with this team, is can we now win with what we're building here? And while I used to think that, hey, I don't necessarily see us winning a bunch of games under Matt Eberflus, that has changed for me a lot, actually. So, but let me know how you guys feel. What is your confidence level right now, Matt Eberflus, and how has that changed from the end of last season to the going into the beginning of this one? Let me know all that down below. Make sure you guys are following the show at Shy Bears Central. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, ChicagoBearsCentral@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-242-9336. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bears related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, Chi-Town up, but Bear down. Love you guys. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.